Great, I think we've got everyone. Welcome. Okay, so let me jump right in. Reinhard and I have not come together with a strategy for this session, which is about resistance to basic income. If you look at Reinhardt's pedigree, you can see that he has a vast international experience in the medical field. And his topic is the difference between basic income and basic services. My topic is about resistance from the what I've called the poverty industry. I'm still admitting people to the session. So I would suggest why don't you start, Reinhard, with talking about the about your the difference between the basic income and basic services from your perspective, and I'll pick up on that from the point of view of the resistance to basic income.
I can start. You want me to start?
Yes.
Okay. So I will try to share the screen and let's see whether it's working. I think it's, yeah, so something is happening. I hope it's...
Yeah, we see your screen.
You can see my screen, so there's something loading. Oh, can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we can.
Okay, good. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending our session. I'm going to talk about UBI, Universal Basic Income, and UBS, Universal Basic Services for Health. And my question is, are they adversaries or are they allies? And my name is Reinhard Huss. I'm a retired public health academic and also used to work in the past as a medical doctor. Now, the objective of this session is to assess the potential interactions between the social income, I call it social income, universal basic service, and the personal income as a basic universal basic income. Because often it's presented as an either or, and there are many reasons. Some say shortage of finance, and other reasons are given why one has to make the choice between one or the other. And I would like to question this sort of antagonism. So first of all, I will raise a question, and which was in the poll, and some of you have answered it already. Then I come to some background, some methods which I used, the findings and discussion, and my conclusions and recommendations. Now the question for you was, what do you think will be the combined effects of universal basic healthcare services and universal basic income? And most of you responded a better world, and some said, okay, we also need to make sure that we have healthcare services. If you have any other suggestions, either put them in the poll or put them in the chat, or we can discuss it during our session later on. I don't know, there is a constant ringing noise. I don't know where it's coming from. As background, I would like to raise first the definition of universal basic services, because maybe some of you are not familiar with it. It was sort of defined by the Institute of Global Prosperity, which also sort of suggested these universal basic services as a new concept, whereby I don't think it is a new concept, because like healthcare and education, we had some universal basic services for quite some time, at least in the high income countries, but also in middle and low income countries. So the definition is an entitlement to services according to need and not one's ability to pay. And they are essential and sufficient rather than minimal to enable people to meet their needs and participate in society and flourish. And they are collectively generated activities that serve the public interest. Now, what you can see there in orange, I added and provisions, because according to my knowledge of universal basic healthcare services, you don't just have activities, but also provisions, such as simple one is medicine. So you need provisions which are sort of given to people for their healthcare. And there are other provisions as well, but it's activities and provision. So this is my addition to the definition of the Global Institute. Now, in order to understand when we talk about do we need one or the other or both, I would like to give a short explanation what I mean with health. I mean, overall health is often sort of measured in life expectancy or healthy life expectancy. And I see it as consisting of 4 components: physical health, which is a maintenance of physiological homeostasis through changing circumstances. What does this mean in practical terms? I give the example of blood pressure. For instance, normally you have it in a range which is normal and indicates health. And then sometimes it rises if you're under stress or if you are sort of doing exercises, but then it goes back to normal unless you have got, for instance, a problem, a health problem with your blood pressure. Then you have mental health, which I define as a positive state of mind and body, which enables and supports good relationships. You have social health, social inclusion, which is social inclusion, social acceptance, and social participation. And that is actually the definition of the World Health Organization of health. Some say, and I think so as well, spiritual health should be included as a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction, support and compassion for others, and responsibility for the common good. So I include spiritual health as an important aspect of health. Now, my questions for this session is, what is the link between health and basic income? What public health service functions are sort of supported by basic income? What are the NHS England in terms of free and comprehensive health services? What does the NHS England provide? And I focus deliberately on England because in the UK, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland all have different conditions, and it would have sort of been not possible to cover all the different aspects. So I just want to see NHS England, what does it provide in terms of free and comprehensive health services? You can do the same assessment for Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, or Wales. And finally, what does cash transfer studies tell us about what people do with the cash and what resources for health are obtained? And so do we need a basic income in future? Because we don't have a basic income anywhere. We just have cash transfer studies in order to support health. So I will start with the first aspect in my findings and discussion, perspectives on health. As I said, that often health is defined in terms of life expectancy or healthy life expectancy. And So life expectancy is just to sort of see how long do we live. Healthy life expectancy means how much of this time do we live in a healthy state. That means without any sort of major health problems. In my opinion, for both universal basic income and universal basic services, healthcare services are required to achieve this. Especially in terms of spiritual well-being, I don't think this can be covered by universal basic services. I think there we need a universal basic income. Also, in terms of time autonomy, for me, healthy life expectancy needs to be complemented by time autonomy. Time autonomy means that we decide how we spend our time, and this can only be guaranteed by a basic income, which is sufficient to cover our basic needs. And this is, I think, very important. Recently, I read a very good study about sort of sustainable welfare services, which said basic income covers consumption while basic services cover sort of supply provision. I think the main aspect of basic income is autonomy and agency of people to decide about their life. And this is for me a very important aspect of health. And then also political and ethical decision-making, which is actually an aspect which is also important for healthcare services and any sort of services, that people become more involved and have time to take part, not just in sort of one every 4 or 5 years elections, but on a regular basis in the political and ethical decision-making about basic services. And this can only be guaranteed if people control their time and can participate in this decision-making. Now, in terms of what are essential public health service functions, I rely on the definition of the WHO, which services are provided. There are or should be provided in any sort of country, in any place. There's health protection, which is often sort of like Public Health England or Public Health Scotland, in terms of ensuring that certain standards are met in restaurants, in like water supply and so on. And this is normally a service which is provided by the services, the universal basic services. UBI may play a role, that's why I put question mark here, in terms of direct involvement of people in determining how these services are run. Health promotion is sort of factors which actually promote health and support health. And I think both universal basic services and universal basic income play an important role. Disease prevention is another important service function, and disease control. We can see it at the moment with COVID. Universal basic services play a very important role, but also universal basic income may sort of play a role in this respect in terms of giving people sort of the essentials, but that is then more in terms of health promotion rather than disease prevention and control. Healthcare services, there is clearly a need for basic services, healthcare services. In terms of universal basic income, again, it may have a positive role in terms of supporting people to access these services and also to make effective use of these services. I put a negative here because one issue regarding UBI, which has not been sort of well investigated, is what happens with people who have some addiction problems if they receive a basic income, and how will it actually improve their condition, or will it actually make it worse? Now, preparedness for public health emergencies, which is again a task of universal basic services, and we live in one public health emergency at the moment with COVID, but there clearly universal basic income, as we can see with the COVID pandemic, plays an important role. Also, what you see on TV, earthquakes, other public health emergencies, a basic income which assures essential essential life needs would play an important role in order to provide a comprehensive preparedness for such emergency. Another issue is complementary and alternative medicine, and that is often not provided by universal basic services like homeopathy, acupuncture and others, because often the evidence is lacking that it is sort of useful. And I agree with this approach, but on the other hand, people may think that it is good from their subjective perspective, from their subjective view, and therefore they may use a basic income to get access to such alternative and complementary medicine. And I think that is a good way to also consider subjective well-being, subjective health. Now, in terms of charges and expenses for the NHS, even that the NHS England is often stated as providing healthcare services free of charge, it's not completely true. There are several charges. The most well-known are outpatient prescription charges, but also charges for health items, dental services, eye tests, eye services are not free. As I already mentioned, complementary and alternative medicines are not covered by universal healthcare services in the UK. And also healthcare travel costs, these are normally paid by patients. So if you are very tight on your budget, it can be a problem if you have to go to a hospital regularly or to see your health center regularly. And also if you need anything to support your health in terms of food or certain aspects, this is normally not covered by the universal healthcare services. You have to cover it through your private sort of personal income, and there a universal basic income would help. You can go and ask if you are very on a low income or have no income for support in these areas, but this is again the sort of stigmatizing process where you have to apply and then it's assessed and then you may eventually get allowed to get access. Obviously, in some cases where people have really big personal needs because of chronic disease, this can only be covered by some special assessment rather than a universal basic income. Now, I looked at what in certain cash transfer studies have people used their cash in order to sort of improve certain health needs. And here I just, on the right, you find the studies, and then they used it for nutrition, for education, for spiritual needs, healthcare, hygiene, clothing, housing, some for transport. No, in these studies I looked, none used it for information and communication technology, but in others, other aspects such as savings, investments for future shocks, they used it in order to protect themselves. And I would also, but it's not in my sort of assessed studies, say like sport and art could play a role in terms of health. Here are some explanations what people used it, sort of cash used for additional food, for secondary education. Some couldn't use it because the cost barriers for education were too high. But an important aspect, for instance, is able to welcome visitors. And that is for me something very important in terms, we could either put it under social or spiritual health. For school trips or exam fees is then again another aspect, increased social activities, general increase of consumption, that is better cooking food, financial stability, sport activities, control over life and resources. Others found a reduced intimate partner violence due to probably more independence of the recipient of cash, change of paid labor, maternal employment and earnings, and reduced child labor. Now, in conclusion, I would like I come to the conclusion that universal basic income is very important for health promotion. It also is important, especially important for time autonomy, which I see as an important aspect of health, not just sort of life expectancy, but people have control over their own time. UBI is also important for people's access to healthcare, yeah. So, and services and ability to deal with public emergencies. So even if we have universal basic services for health, there are certain issues such as access, transport, which are not covered, and also the ability to act in public emergencies such as the one we are living through, and everybody can see how important a basic income would be in such a situation. Even the NHS, as I just tried to explain, requires cash for certain aspects. So when you talk about free services, certain aspects may be free, and in the NHS, in comparison to other countries, probably most things are free, but there are certain things people have to pay, which is often not considered. The most simple one is transport. And the CT studies, the cash transfer studies, show that UBI facilitates access to important resources for health. It promotes spiritual and social health, individual financial security, reduce financial stress, and improve mental health. So for me, this sort of alternative, either UBI or UBS, is a fallacy. It's a wrong alternative. We need both basic income and basic services for the promotion of health. And this is the end of my presentation. And I would like to thank you with a sort of painting from Leeds, where I live. It's actually the trainer of Leeds United. I'm not such a big football fan, but I like the phrase he has coined: a man with new ideas is a madman until his ideas triumph. And this is from, as I said, the trainer of Leeds United. So it also applies to basic income. Thanks a lot and have a good day. And over to you. Pierre.
Okay, could you unshare your screen?
I thought I have done it. Didn't it? I thought I unshared.
Okay. Here we go.
I hope you could see my presentation.
At the beginning, yeah. At the end, I don't think so.
Oh.
Okay. Perhaps we can open up to questions.
I just want to say that I could see your presentation the whole way.
Okay, thank you.
Well, perhaps I can ask a question, Reinhard.
Yes.
I agree with your conclusion that there's no competition between basic income and basic services. One of the issues or the objections to basic income is that it threatens universal services. Case in point, in the usual case that's mentioned is healthcare. Milton Friedman was demonized for supporting a form of basic income, but was suspected of wanting to replace basic services with it. Like, for instance, in Canada, we have national health care. A Milton Friedman type basic income would remove the basic health services and give people money instead. And the approach would be instead of providing service, we'll give you the money and you figure out how to get the service, or if you want the services or not. Now, that's certainly not something that we accept in general in the basic income community. We assume that if we introduce basic income, we will retain all of the public services, especially healthcare services. So,
yeah, I mean, do you want me to respond to this question?
Yes. Do you think that that's because that's basically where I want to intervene, is the resistance to basic income is often the fear that we're threatening basic services. That's one thing.
Yeah, I mean, my response is for regarding basic income, there are two poles of basic income proponents, and what Milton Friedman proposes is, I call the neoliberal version, which I'm totally opposed to. It basically means get rid of all services and give everybody a basic income, and then people can decide what to use it on. And I'm opposed to it for various reasons, because as I said, I'm a doctor and public health professional by background, retired. There's a good reason why we have basic education and basic services as a universal service. It's based on evidence, and the collective provision is much more effective, efficient, equitable than individual provision. I mean, I just compare the United States, where you have predominantly private provision of healthcare services, and the UK or other countries, and all the health indicators are much better in the UK than in the United States. There's even the film Sicko, which shows that Cuba has better health indicators than the United States, even that some people may not like the political system of Cuba, but it's quite clear that certain services are much better provided as services than people buying them individually. And also there is a so-called, economists talk about asymmetry of information, that people cannot have complete, it's not the same to buy a sort of surgical intervention than to buy a piece of soap or a piece of fish or a banana, where you can see the banana is rotten or is not tasting well, but what happens in your surgery, you are not able to assess. So that makes it's good reason to have basic services in healthcare and, for instance, education. And for me, the other aspect is the financing. But I think if we want, we have so many sort of resources generated through our economic system and so much technology, we could provide both a basic income and basic resources and basic universal basic services. But I think if I go into details here, it would, and probably Annie would be better to respond to this, it would sort of go beyond the topic of this session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other interventions before I launch into my my presentation? Just go ahead and unmute yourself and talk. That would be fine.
Sure. So I guess a question I like to ask people is, what do you feel is the primary problem that basic income solves? Is there a single thing that you would point to?
I mean, as I presented, I mean, as I said in my presentation, it is time autonomy, because and I mean, in a previous presentation, and when I was working at the university, I felt I had no autonomy over my time, because I'm sort of basically forced to work for an employer, and yeah, who controls my time. Yeah, even if it is somebody like a university. And so I think if I get a basic income, I have time autonomy, I have freedom to decide how I want to spend my time. And for me, this is a key aspect. It's not just life expectancy or healthy life expectancy, but it is the autonomy to decide how I want to use my life, my time.
Okay, good answer. Thank you.
It was Ali. Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry, I'll just allow my camera to be used. May I also offer another answer to Alex's question? My name is Sherry McDade. I work as head of evidence and impact for the Mental Health Foundation in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And one of the things that we're interested in is the potential that basic income overcomes the negative mental health effects of benefit systems, current benefit systems, particularly in being able to reduce the sense of shame or stigma that people feel in having to apply for benefits on the basis of some negative status. And also, ideally removes a lot of the mental effort and time involved in applying for and fulfilling eligibility criteria, which we have some provisional evidence of, that these things really negatively affect the mental health of benefit recipients. And for those who are parents, particularly lone parents, negatively affects their ability to look after children, thus negatively impacting on the mental health of the children. So we think there could be very good mental health reasons why a universal basic income is preferable to any benefit system which has a lot of hoops that you have to go through and demonstrate need, as are most welfare systems today.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think that addresses Alex's question. What problems? The question was what problems basic income solves. I think one of the unfortunate aspects of the way basic income is framed, it is precisely that it is associated with solving poverty, and I think that's unfortunate because the real objective of basic income is to provide freedom, and I think Reinhardt has expressed this very well. And part of the I guess so that would be my response to that question.
Interesting. It doesn't feel like any of these answers are wrong, right? Certainly it helps with all of the above.
Yes, there's no question that basic income would. We often hear the comment that basic income would not be a panacea. Reminds me of the comment that poverty is not only about money. That's true. However, it's always about money. So I don't know if you catch the distinction there. Many people are suspect of basic income for that very reason, and that's one of the resistances to basic income. So that's what I would expand upon. If there aren't any other questions right now.
I mean,
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just want to add, I mean, as I said, I try to argue that in most, even if you have public services, I mean, just look at the different emergencies around the world, the COVID globally, the earthquake in Haiti, the flooding in Turkey. In all of them, if people had a basic income, it would sort of supplement, even if you have services providing emergency, that would take care of the essential needs, or could take care. Obviously, there is always the sort of precondition that the cash can be translated into resources. If you have no resources, it doesn't make sense. But for instance, many refugee agencies have nowadays stopped giving sort of food and other items and give cash to people so that they can buy these basic resources which they need, such as food themselves, rather than providing food. The only reason to give food is if you cannot convert the money into sort of food, then it's obviously much better in such emergency situations to provide food or other essential items.
Yeah, I like that. The way I like to think about it sometimes is that basic income is useful when it's efficient for the market to be allocating the resources rather than kind of allocating it directly to the government.
You can look at it like this, yes. Yeah. If you have a sort of good, and that is, I mean, okay, you can also, that's why there was earlier the question about essential services or to get rid and give it just as income. There are many reasons why you have market failures, for instance, in healthcare provision, and therefore it doesn't make sense. It's another argument to provide healthcare through basic income, with people buying healthcare in sort of personally, because there are sort of, as I said, many market failures in this respect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next topic. My topic is regarding the resistance to basic income from the poverty industry. I don't know if I'm just coined that phrase. It's basically all professionals involved in helping professions, such as medical profession, welfare workers, social workers, basically experts who take care of the disadvantaged people, and that's their job, and that's their livelihood. And there's a conflict of interest between the dealing with poverty and trying to eliminate it and keeping their job. Healthcare workers, social workers have a have privileged positions in society. They have good middle class jobs, which depend on helping people in need. So there's actually a reaction to elimination of poverty that it's going to eliminate their job. So that's one of the resistance to basic income. On a philosophical level, the principle of basic income, which is empowerment, does not it contradicts the approach of the specialist. It flies in the face of their expertise. It's basic income is saying, give people money, trust them, and leave them alone, and they will find the best solutions to their problems. Whereas a social worker or a doctor will say, well, no, I have the solutions, and you trust me. I will decide what's good for you. Now, as Reinhardt has said, this is justified in the case of medicine, but it's where do you draw the line? So where do you draw the line between services that are provided by the state, ideally, and empowerment that is provided by the person themselves? I would like to stop there and ask if there are any questions on that or any comments before I continue.
Yeah, so I guess this is kind of related to basic income maybe not being appropriate when there's market failure and being appropriate when markets are efficient. So I guess a question we could ask about that is it true that basic income has an opinion about where to draw the line between what the government should do and what the market should do? Or is it just that for the stuff you've decided to leave to the market, basic income is an efficient way to get people money?
Well, who decides? That's, I guess, the question. And the issue is that the people who decide are perhaps not the best ones to do so, but we have no control over that. That's the way the problem I see with the distinction between the income and services. I don't actually see a solution. the solution would be a political one rather than a theoretical one.
So maybe theoretically we could say there's some line that we draw between what's provided through public services and, you know, what we just give people money to allocate themselves, and then where that line is depends on a lot of political stuff and how efficient our institutions are and stuff like that.
I mean, if I may come in, I mean, in some way for me, basic income is again a helpful solution, because basic income also, in my opinion, gives people more democratic participation and decision making. And I mean, the concept, the problem with universal basic services, the problem is it's not quite clear what should be universal. And I mean, education is a very good example. You see, in some countries, you have universality from kindergarten to university. In others, you have just primary education. And I mean, personally, I am convinced that education should be free from childhood to old age and should be provided as universal basic services. But there is a sort of variation, and a lot of these, like in the UK, is a good example. It has been cut, and like university education is very expensive these days. And some also argue, or if you get a basic income, we can sort of, this can be covered. I think university education should be provided by society or by the state, and it should not be, and any education a person needs should be provided by society. And but it is a disputed topic, and I think therefore it's again important to have a basic income so that you can get more involved in politics, that politics is not done to you, but that you do politics and co-determine what is actually should be provided by society and how it should be provided. Thank you. Oh, silence. I think
So
Annie wants to.
So maybe education is one of those things where if you just handed people a bunch of money and told them to go buy some education, you wouldn't get an efficient outcome.
I don't think you would get so, but let's Annie. Annie is raising her hands. Please go. I don't know.
It's really a comment. My experience of the charity industry is that most people who work for charities, their main objective is to do themselves out of a job. And so I would imagine they're the sort of people who would very much welcome a basic income which they could live on when the job was over. The problem has been that certainly in the UK, the charity industry has been commercialized and made competitive. And so that charitable impulse may have been suppressed, and partly with the massive incomes granted to CEOs of some of the big charities, which I think is very unfortunate.
I agree, Annie, but I think it's more complicated. I mean, I argue, I mean, I have been working in the so-called development industry. I have been more than 12 years active in Africa, and I have been going there with good intentions, and at least I hope so. I thought so. I went there, but also that was another reason which led me to basic income, because I was wondering whether all this money which is siphoned off, like I worked for the German development industry, and most of the money, of the development money, goes back to Germany for purchases in Germany. Then I get a good salary, and then with the corruption, which is interestingly ignored by the sort of international organizations. I mean, the latest example is for me Afghanistan. I mean, with the amount of corruption, and now they are all shocked of what is happening. I say, if you ignore corruption, you get punished with blindness, and you don't understand what's going on. So I only realized during my work there that it, in my opinion, it makes little sense to send all people like myself there, and people don't even have money to buy the essential goods. And why not give them money to buy the essential goods, than to send all these experts to try and improve something which I think people can improve themselves. Thank you.
So is there anyone else?
I don't know whether Pierre has a bad connection. He seems to be in and out. Maybe we can sort of, while we are waiting. Pierre, are you in twice? There appear two of your icons. So this may create some feedback. But do people want to raise questions, comments?
Can I say that while we're thinking about resistance to the basic income, we can think of several. You've already implied, Reinhardt, even though you've rejected the idea that some people might think that universal basic services, or some people are against them, like the neoliberals anyway. And Pierre has pointed out that people in the poverty industry might be against it because it threatens their jobs. People in trade unions are also in the same position. And I think it's obvious that some trade unions who are concerned about their members are in favor of basic income, but those who are more concerned about the power of the union are against basic income. So there's another set of resistance. And then if you think of laborists, these are people who want universal basic services, but they want collective decision making. They don't want individual freedom, and they're not too concerned that they don't want a basic income. They want to have minimum income guarantees, which effectively is a means-tested benefit with a 100% withdrawal rate, which provides an income ceiling rather than income floor for low-income people. And now there's the foreign aid problem. And I agree that it'd be far more sensible to give people a basic income than give foreign aid to a country if it could be administered properly without avoid the corruption. I think it would be an excellent idea. And there must be other examples too of people who would feel threatened. I mean, mostly we think about people on high incomes who are going to have to pay tax more. And I think there could be ways to ameliorate that. I mean, I'm far more concerned to get rid of the tax welfare, the tax loopholes in our system, which can cost the country enormously in terms of taxable gone, rather than increase tax rates on the highest incomes. I would try to keep it below 50%. But on the other hand, countries like Sweden can have income tax rates of 65%. And yet people who work for international companies still like working in Sweden. They think it's one of the nicest places to work. And so it's not to do with there being a high tax rate. So we can look at all of these and say which are the ones which have the greatest strength in opposition. Essentially, how many are there in these positions, and how much political weight have they with the government and those people who are the policy makers or the opinion influencers? And I think we have to look at them all as a whole to see how much of a threat they are to basic income and to its implementation eventually. But I'm very much an academic rather than a politician. And I know that Pierre is far more interested in advocacy than academia. And so he's probably got more insights into this than I have. So Pierre, if you want to have an opportunity to tell us a bit more about this and about the problems of facing advocacy, including the problems that academics make in not being precise enough in our terms, it might be interesting if you gave us a few minutes of that.
Sure. I think my sound is back, eh? Yes, there is a where to start. we're talking about the resistance to basic income. It's both from the inside and from the outside, and I think we have to make a distinction between how we address the two. I made the point in another session that we can't address the problem of the discussion about basic income with friends and with opponents in the same way. With friends, we have to be, I think, very plain about the differences that we see in the definitions, interpretations of the definitions, and address it in that way. With opponents, arguments are of no use. Confirmation bias only creates more resistance and more opposition to the notion, to the concept of basic income. There we have to take a more strategic approach and appeal to the values that these people defend, with recognizing that they have in many cases the best intentions in the world. So those are the I think the challenges we have in dealing with the resistance to basic income. It's both internal and external, and the solutions are different in each case. You can appeal to rational argument with friends. It's pointless to do so with opponents. There you have to take a different approach, a more strategic approach.
Do you feel like it's easier to talk about basic income with basic income supporters or with basic income opponents?
I think it's difficult with both, but for different reasons. And it's probably, I think there's more potential with opponents, because it forces you to get away from the triggers that create opposition. For instance, the association of basic income with poverty is any time you use poverty in the same sentence as basic income, you're losing all the opponents. Nobody supports poverty, for sure. However, when you try and present basic income as a solution, this is obvious to supporters, but it's not obvious to opponents, and I think we have to recognize that. However, it's easier to see that this conflict with opponents, because they react right away, and you end up having an argument, a discussion, and at the end of the discussion, you realize that your opponent is more opposed than he was at the beginning of the argument. You don't see that with friends, because the differences are not obvious. Everyone agrees that among friends, we all agree that basic income is going to fight poverty. So we never delve into the nitty-gritty of why, how, what specifics. So these are things that can be hidden when you're dealing with the friend. We have just as an aside, we have another panel discussion next tomorrow on the definition of the interpretation of two questions on basic income, which are technical questions, not of much interest to our opponents, but seem to be sticking points amongst UB supporters. And in that case, the approach we took was to develop the questions, the framing of the questions together. And I think that's a useful approach to take amongst friends, which you can't do amongst opponents. There's no way that differing views, fundamentally differing views, can proceed with that kind of a process. But we did it. I thought it was amazingly simple and very gratifying. Yes, Annie.
Why do you think so many people are not concerned about poverty? I mean, how is it that some people who are very wealthy themselves, even knowing that 20% of the UK, for instance, lives in poverty, including children, and not just below, but substantially below subsistence level according to the OECD benchmark, how can they not be concerned, ashamed, worried, and empathetic about it? I mean, are they all just psychopaths, or can someone explain it to me? I just find it so incomprehensible about why people are not concerned about poverty. Way back in 2019, Professor Philip Alston, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, gave a report about the situation of poverty in the UK. And he said the evidence is that 20% of the population live in poverty. And he was absolutely excoriating about the UK government and accused them of systematically immiserating the poor. And you'd think that something like that, there ought to have been a revolution. And yet it seemed the government just said, oh, that's not true. And without any evidence to contradict it, and nothing happened. I mean, why weren't all the MPs jumping up and down? How can people just accept it? Is it they're just too worried, too poor on their own account, that they haven't got any concern for anybody else? Can someone explain it to me?
Well, I think you've explained it very well. People, specifically with poverty, you'll find no one saying that poverty is a good thing, that poverty shouldn't be eliminated. Everyone agrees with that. However, when you get to examining the reasons why, there's a whole ideology which explains it. People are poor because they deserve it, and when you're poor, you're punished. That's crudely what people think. They don't think that. They won't verbalize it. But our government's policies implement that worldview. People on welfare here where I live earn 50% below the poverty line. So that's explicitly, in a policy saying that, listen, you need so much to live on decently, and we're giving you 50% of that. And how can you see that any other way than as punishment for some moral fault of being poor? Now, I don't think you'll find many academics which will say that the poverty is due to some moral fault. It's not a defect of a human being. However, that's the way it's presented. And why don't people do anything about it? Because they think that people helping poor people is being unfair to everybody else. Specifically, the attitude is why should I help someone? I work for my money. Why should I give my hard-earned money to somebody else? So that's on the one hand, that's the attitude. I don't think anyone's proud of that. People won't brag that they think that, but deep down, it's worked into our system and politicians not only benefit from that, but drive it home for electoral purposes, and it works. So that's what we're up against. And that's why I say poverty should not be mentioned when we're talking about basic income, because it ties into that type of framing of the situation. An example of getting around that is the childcare. We have what I call a basic income for children in Canada. In the United States, that's in the news now. They've introduced what could develop into a basic income for children. There's no way that they're going to have work requirements for children. They're not going to discriminate between one child and another child. So all of the basics for basic income are there. What's not there is the distinction between the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. Poor children are all deserving poor. So there's no issue about that. So that's one way of getting around. If you talked about poor people who are adults, well, then they're part of the undeserving poor. So they're just, we don't worry about those people as a society. I'm not talking personally. I'm talking people who thought about this, but just Mr. Joe Public who has to vote, saying, well, should we help the undeserving poor? No. I mean, it's as simple as that. When he's presented with an actual poor person, of course, compassion kicks in, charity, but all of that is a paternalistic attitude, which has nothing to do with basic income, which is all about empowerment. So the paradigm is exactly the opposite of what we believe, which is give people money first, then they work, then they contribute to society. The paradigm we're using is first you work to earn your right to live and contribute to society. And our opponents believe that. So you have to address that somehow. Question of fairness, question of earning your living, as though you had to do something to justify breathing, and so on. So you're right. There is no people just really don't. Most people just don't care. Yes, and they find ways to justify it. Is there anyone else who'd like to step in?
Reinhardt wants to speak.
I think I'm not sure. I'm in and out because my internet is unstable, so somebody may have already said this. I think if you want to analyze the real reasons, I mean, for this problem is a phrase of somebody called Pierre Bourdieu, a late sociologist and anthropologist, who said, the oppressed have to agree to their own oppression. And I think the whole idea that you need to work first in order to get income is basically, a political and psychological tool, and people sort of agree to it. And the real reason is basic income is opposed because it gives people freedom. And but obviously this is not going to be discussed because this would be sort of unveil the political agenda behind it. So I think it's as simple as that. And it's like when you ask people, if you get a basic income, would you work? Then people say, oh yes, obviously I would. But if you think, if you ask, would other people work? And then they say, oh no, they would not. So, I mean, this is a way to control people. And obviously, if you want to control people, it's better not to give them a basic income. Thank you.
So how do we get around this? Yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Pierre, if you want to add something, feel free. Yes.
Well, I was just saying the problem is, okay, you have different ideologies competing. One, the basic income community, which is for empowerment, and you have basically the opposition, which doesn't trust empowerment and holds to the controlling ideology that government knows best what to do for you and so on, with the exception of public services, of course. But I don't think anyone questions in the UB community that public services should be maintained. Basic income is something over and above. So how do you argue for basic income to people who don't believe in it? And as I said, you have to address the discussion differently among friends and with opponents. So how do you discuss what to do with opponents when you're among friends, with all the opponents listening in? I don't think that's a problem, because first of all, you take advantage of the fact that the opponents don't believe anything you say and use that to your advantage. You have to not talk, for instance, you don't talk about poverty, you talk about fairness. For instance, is it fair that children don't have enough money to eat, that they don't have the same opportunities depending on the wealth of their parents? So you talk about that, you mention that, and you engage your opponents on that. On that.
Are you hearing me?
Right? Yes.
Me? Okay. I could say something briefly. Some people have been talking about their concern for how to get the left more involved in supporting a basic income. Well, the basis for left opposition to it is just this, BI can be used as a means of control. And that's something that to be understood. And if you can solve that problem, if you can define the basic income more clearly as, or have some kind of a split and get away from people who want to use it, talking about versions that are a means of control, really, you would get, I think, much more support from the left, and you'd have a broad enough support that you could probably actually achieve it. So you got to stop talking about Milton Friedman and like that's a positive selling point. Okay, this is how you win. This is the way you win over the left. Get the kind of broad enough support to actually start achieving something. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for being late at this reunion. I don't know if you talked about the obstacles to the implementation of the UBI that occurs inside the United Nations. Okay, so the United Nations has also a civilian consultation that occurs, and it is part of the CTAP consultation, civilian consultation, and they also do the investigation also for but the civilian can observe and join also to the objectives that the United Nations have. So feel free to see there. And I also put in the chat participative documents. If you can identify obstacles to the implementation of the universal basic income, feel free to add the thematic or which obstacle you do identify. in your local area or on other governments or institutions. And thanks for your collaboration and for what you are doing. And I think this is you, Annie, the moderator of this group. Oh no. Who's the moderator of this group from the Bien?
This is one of the few groups that there are not enough volunteers to help to moderate or host. And so the two presenters are co-hosting this session. That's Pierre and Reinhard.
Okay.
I just happen to be around as well.
Okay.
I'm talking too much.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wish somebody had told me
if I
and
can
I
have
knew how
something
to
about
handle
it too.
these different buttons.
Yes, Raina.
Is it possible to make a small comment? Or am I too late, Valeria from Slovenia?
No, please go ahead, Valeria. I don't know,
Yes.
as I said, I don't know who is the moderator.
Okay, look, about control. I'm a sociologist, so I'm obviously very fond of social control. I believe it's necessary for social cohesion and socialization. So I'm a little bit disturbed in this UBI community talking about the freedom and full freedom. I don't really agree. I wanted to make a point that it's important how much control do we have and how much freedom do we give. It's not yes or no, but it has to be a level of it. I'm sorry, maybe I'm too late jumping into the discussion, but I just wanted to make a point that even if we give UBI on the level of poverty threshold, it doesn't make free all the people on the same level. It depends. So actually, I really think we have to speak about the differentiation of, I don't know, control and freedom. Thank you.
If I may just come in, I think it's important. I agree with Valeria, there is always social control, and social control is part of social living, but what we have is got hierarchical control of a small elite controlling others, and there I disagree, and I think it's a big problem because we are in the mess we are in because of this elite looking for their interests rather than for the interest of the collectivity of all human beings.
Perhaps I do agree, Reinhard, but I would like to mention that the poor people are the most under the control, the most under the pressure. And the funny thing is, the poor people need less money to survive, you know? So if we want to give a freedom to a lot of people, poor people, we can always start with the very low basic income. And, you know, and the level of freedom in society will raise up a lot. Thank you.
If I just want to make another comment here. I think in terms of opponent, I think you need to, first of all, analyze why people are opposed in order to understand the problem. Like I call myself a supporter, but probably when it comes to the financing of basic income, I have certain problems, and some people may be opposed to it because of that. For instance, I have discussions with Annie. I'm sort of very skeptical about this income-based solution that basic income is financed through income tax. I don't think this is a good approach, but okay, I accept it as one option. And I also want to comment, like Sweden, why has Sweden got such high taxes and acceptance? Because in Sweden, a lot of money is spent at the local level and decided at the local level so people can see and influence how it is spent. In the UK, and again, and unless you have lived outside the UK, it's an extremely centralized political system, and everything is decided by few people in London. And obviously that makes you very skeptical about how your tax is used and will be spent. And even I sometimes ask this question, if this government is going to collect money for a basic income, is it really going to spend it on a basic income? So I have my doubts, you see, and so I'm not opposed to a basic income, but I would get very frightened if the UK government at the moment would say, oh yes, we like it, and we raise taxes on your income in order to finance a basic income. It's a bit like the NHS, which is slowly but gradually dismantled by this government. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for too bad we finish on a negative note, but I think we're out of time. We're getting messages here that the next session starts in 9 minutes. And the next session is about the United Nations development. I think
no, it doesn't have to be a negative note. I mean, I think basic income should enhance political participation.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing of basic income is it enhances political participation. So not politics being done to you, but you do politics. That I think is the thing we need to get across.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Fortunately, we're out of time.
May I, before it stops, I put in the chat also in the Etherpad participative document another tool that is also recommended by the WHO in those times of crisis. It is Meet Jitsi. And if you want to talk more about this topic, I propose a reunion the 23rd of September, and with the link of the Meet Jitsi. Feel free. And there's all video conferencing in 10 minutes with the UN Department of the UNDP. So also feel free to join this reunion. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you, Nicholas. Bye-bye.